Hello, my name is Sitar Namwadi, and this is the Africa Theatre Podcast. We are continuing the conversation with Mumbi Kaigwa, a Kenyan thespian. Mumbi, I'm so thrilled to be here with you, continuing this conversation. And right now, what I'd like us to do is to center your work. You started out as an actor. Mm-hmm. I've watched you. Mm-hmm. I have had the incredible honor of watching you perform. And then you started to create your own work. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about why you made that leap, mm-hmm. and also focus on some of the work that you've created over the years?
May I start with leaving the UN?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But then that means that you'll have to tell us about the UN a bit.
Yeah.
Because we need some background. I know that you're a thespian, but I also know that you worked as in the United Nations and did various other things. So maybe you can talk about that.
Yeah, because it was when I left the UN that I realized that that acting was a job. Mm-hmm. I didn't know that before.
Okay.
It was just something that I did that I was somehow good at, mm-hmm. but I didn't know that it was a career or something I could do as a job. Mm-hmm. So I worked for the UN for 10 years, and the first 6 years I ran a library, a documentation center, and I was a research assistant in the health department of the UNICEF Kenya office. Mm-hmm. And then I wanted to do a little bit more than sort of sit with the books. Mm-hmm. I took a job as a program officer with the United Nations Drug Control Program, mm-hmm. which is now called the United Nations Office for Drugs and Crime. Mm-hmm. And during those 4 years that I was with UNDCP, I really wanted to be a senior official. Mm-hmm. I felt that this was my career. I felt that this is what I wanted to do.
Right.
I had joined the UN to replace a JPO, a junior professional officer, mm-hmm. and I didn't really know the sort of like the gradings of mm-hmm. In the UN, and I realized I was doing the same job at a local salary that somebody had been doing at what they call a professional salary. Mm-hmm. So I started to argue my case mm-hmm. sort of 2 years in mm-hmm. and ask for a promotion or an opportunity to be at the grade that the person I was replacing had been at.
Right.
And I was told, well, most of the people who are interviewing are at the master's level, so why don't you get a master's? Mm-hmm. So I had 2 young children, 2 and 4 mm-hmm. years old, and I went to USIU, the United States International University, and I got myself a master's.
You got yourself a master's degree?
Yes.
Excellent.
I got myself a Master of Science in Management mm-hmm. and Organizational Development.
Mm-hmm. Very impressive. Mm-hmm.
But what then happened is that I started to feel that I didn't need validation.
Right.
I had this wonderful opportunity to be in class with people who are much younger than me. I hadn't been in school for a long, long time. I had finished, I'd graduated in 1985 with my BA, mm-hmm. and this was now 1998 that I was graduating with my MSc. My Master of Science. But I did go back to my bosses and say I would like a promotion.
Right.
And they said, well, I'm not the boss who told you to go and get the degree. Mm-hmm. So I said to myself, I still want the promotion.
Right.
And in that way, some kind of validation. Mm-hmm. And I wanted... When I asked the person who was my current boss, he said, the boss who told you to go and get the MSc is not me, so mm-hmm. let me see how you do. Mm-hmm. So I did another 2 years.
Wow, okay.
Or another year. And then I counted the years, the 6 and the 4, the 6 at UNICEF and the 4 at UNDCP. And I thought, I've given this thing a good go. I've done 10 years. I think I'm, if I can't get this promotion, I'm not, because it's consuming me.
Right.
It's all I'm thinking about. I'm not doing the work.
You're just thinking about getting that promotion.
Yeah, I'm just trying to jump through the hoops in order to get the promotion.
Right.
So I went to my boss and I said, I resign. And he laughed. Nobody resigns from the UN. And I said, dude, I'm out. Because with this piece of paper, this 2-year course that I had done, I felt that I didn't need what I had needed before I had it. If you can understand what I mean.
Yes.
It wasn't necessary to have the bells and whistles anymore. So I left the UN.
Yes.
Very soon after I left the UN, I was auditioning for a role in a film called Forgotten.
Right.
Which ironically has never come out.
Yes.
So I'm not sure whether it was in the name already.
Right. They forgot. Okay.
But it was a great role and it was a great opportunity. It was 10 weeks work. I was a professional actor. I was performing every single day. I had the lead role. And I realized one morning that this is what I wanted to do with the rest of my life.
Right.
And I thought, okay, if this is what I want to do with the rest of my life, I need to register something. So I registered a company and created a space in which to then be a theatre company. I wasn't so much about making film because that was very expensive then. There weren't the innovations and developments that there are now. That was 1999, 2000.
Okay.
And things were extremely expensive. You weren't in a film unless there was foreign money.
Right.
And I wanted to create my own work. So the first thing that I did was to create a piece of theatre that raised money for a drug rehabilitation center in Western Kenya.
Oh, wow. Okay.
They had come to us. They had asked us for help. We had said, your project is too small because obviously the resources that we would be putting into a small
When you were at the
project-
UN?
When I was at the UN.
Okay.
Yes. When I was at the UN, this person had come to us. The resources that we would have been putting for a small project are the same as one for a big project. And so we had to pick and choose. And we had said, we had to say, your project is a little bit too small for us because we're a very small office. So when I left the UN, I created a piece of theatre that raised money for this rehab center.
Great. Okay.
So having done that, I then, because hindsight is 20/20 vision.
Yes.
I feel like what became available to me was an opportunity to do work that said something. So
right.
These particular pieces for the drug rehab center were about alcoholism. And I felt that I wanted my work to speak, to say certain things or to say things.
Yes.
And not just
entertain.
Yes.
But to actually, touch the hearts or touch the minds or yes.
Change lives.
Yeah, change lives.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah.
Yeah. But I didn't know that. It wasn't like I said, I'm going to change lives and I'm going to create global peace.
Right.
But I knew that was the kind of work that really appealed to me. So around that same time that I was doing that show, I was invited to a similar thing like this, where there was an audience of people. There isn't an audience here, but there was an audience of people, and we were being asked about career moves.
Right.
And I had moved from the UN, and now I was this person who was running a company that was devoted to arts and culture.
Yeah, and your boss who told you, ha ha ha, nobody leaves the UN, must have been speechless. I hope
so. But there were people in the audience who, when the moment came for people to ask questions, they said, how do you leave the UN? I'm in a job that I hate or that I feel I would want to leave. I want to do what's in my heart, what my dream is. And you've left what's really like at the top of the scale of jobs
that everybody wants.
That everybody wants, that would answer all problems, monetary problems. And I went away from that talk and had a conversation with a close friend of mine and said, can you imagine people are asking me how I walked away from a job at the UN? I wonder what people would have done if they could walk away from the circumstances that they're in.
Right.
And she said, why don't you ask them? And so The Voice of a Dream, which was my first play, was asking people that question.
Excellent.
What would you have done if you hadn't had to do the job that you're doing now? And people said all sorts of things.
Yes.
And I thought that I was inventing a technique because I was interviewing people and I knew what I was going to do was to perform verbatim what these people had said. I had an encounter with a wonderful woman who you and I both know, called Roberta Levitau.
Yes, Roberta.
And she told me that there was this wonderful woman called Anna Devere Smith, who at that time was making a name for herself as a documentary theatre performer. And she would interview people, sometimes in the hundreds of people, and she had these pieces that she had created acting verbatim theatre. So I was like, oh, I didn't invent this thing.
Okay.
But that's okay.
Yeah.
Moving quite forward.
Yes.
So then I started to, so I created Voice of a Dream. And at around the same time, I had also had an encounter with the Tanzanians. The Tanzanians have a style of theatre that is magical.
It's delicious.
You don't understand anything. I mean, I hardly spoke Swahili then. I'd been raised at a time when Swahili and, any other language that wasn't French, German, Spanish, or English.
Yes.
Was, those were not, those weren't proper choices.
Yes.
What are you going to do with those languages? So, I didn't speak much Swahili, but I would sit and listen to the poetry and the lyricism of Tanzanian performance and just be enwrapped.
Right.
And I encountered a company called Parapanda Theatre Lab.
Yes.
And they had drums and dancers and steel drums and percussion instruments. And in a culture where the electronic is revered over traditional, it was magical to see how this group of very young people were using traditional musical instruments.
Right.
And they weren't saying we have to play the flute and we have to play the guitar and we have to play the, the Western drums.
Right.
And it was an awakening, another awakening for me. So when I wrote Voice of a Dream, I had drummers. I had a guy from Congo and two guys from the coast, and we danced and performed the narration.
Right.
So each piece had a dance that accompanied it, that described the feeling of the piece.
And I'm so happy because I watched you perform that, which was a revolution in Kenya. It totally was in theatre in Kenya.
I would love to do it again.
I think you need to.
Because we didn't have as much knowledge or confidence, I would say.
Right.
I used a lot of recorded music, and so I was never able to do the show again because of copyright issues. But I would love to do it again. We performed a dance called using Hugh Masekela's celebration of Fela Kuti, in which he sings the song Lady. If you call a woman African woman, no go gree. He go say, That song accompanied a piece that was actually about you.
I know. And let me tell you, you said you wanted to change people. You wanted to transform the world. Let me tell you, my beginnings as a theater person, as a person who left the UN like you, okay, and became who I am today, Sitara Namwalye, the third, a poet, playwright, performer. That moment when you interviewed me about what I wanted, what I would have done, is a produced Sitara Namwalye. Mumbi Kaigwa.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's what I want my work to do.
Thank you. Thank you. You did it. I'm sitting here.
I've had people come up to me and say they've left jobs. It's such a huge responsibility.
It is.
But I'm so honored and so proud.
Yeah.
I'm so honored and so proud to have been able, because even now, I was, my daughter is a musician.
Yes.
And she has friends who are musicians whose parents are completely against their choice of careers.
Right.
And this is what happens when we're young. When we were young, we were told that these things were not important. Our total colonization.
Yes.
Thank you. Our total colonization has meant that there was a statute in our laws that was called the fear of dancing.
The fear of dancing.
Yeah.
Yes.
A chief, and usually it was a colonial chief, could stop people from dancing.
Yes.
Could stop, and it was in the laws of Kenya.
Right.
I think it was written in 1938.
And it was repealed?
And I'm not sure it's ever been repealed, because we do this thing where we don't
think it was repealed. I think it was repealed this century. I think I remember that.
Yeah. It's possible that it was repealed this century.
Yeah.
And
so you're talking about the fear of dancing law that existed.
Law. And so, we have embodied that.
Right.
So that even now in this century, there are people who are my generation, who have children, who are trying to be artists,
right,
who are called, because you're called to this thing.
You're called to it, and there's nothing, and you must hear.
No control.
Exactly.
And if we are going to say that the Christian faith, which many people in Kenya profess, says that each one has a gift, then the fact that parents will not allow these gifts to manifest themselves because they're afraid of whatever they're afraid of. I mean, it's often because maybe people think you won't be able to make an income. But I'm so pleased that now there are so many more young people. But in my own experience, there are young people around me and around my daughter whose parents are completely opposed, who want them to get the law degree, who want them to be engineers, who don't want them to even have something on the side. And yet the best mathematicians are musicians.
Right.
Because music is maths.
Exactly.
It's the same.
Exactly.
And I'm saying this so that, I can put my voice behind those who doubt that being an artist is a valuable thing.
Right.
Because as somebody who has, stayed the course, I know that there should be many more of us. Exactly. When you look at other like Western countries, there are a lot more people who are my age who are professional actors. Right. Whereas in Kenya, you can count them possibly on one hand. Right. Which is a shame.
Exactly. Yeah. Can you then also tell us about, I know that there's another big production, which I watched, Kigezi Ndoto. And I think that was another groundbreaking piece of work, so I do want people to know, the work that you've done.
Kigezindoto was my attempt to speak the names of heroes.
Right.
And heroes even in ourselves and in our mothers and our fathers and our own ordinary people who are people who fetch water. All around town, you see these people in, pulling water to various businesses. You see people selling vegetables on the side of the road. All of those are heroes. We think that heroes are politicians or are people who have money. And I wanted to break that stereotype. And I had been invited, it was the first time I was invited outside of the country, commissioned to do a piece of theatre for a festival in Europe. And because the festival was called World Music Theatre Festival, they were inviting people from places other than Europe. And all of the companies were going to speak in their own language.
Yes.
And when I heard that, I was like, well, then I don't think I can do a show in English.
Right.
And even though I don't speak Swahili, I'm going to write a piece that's in Swahili. So I wrote the English and then hired a cast of people who, again, I was having to break a mold. People would come to the audition and they would recite Shakespeare or they would recite something that they had done in school that was in English. And while that's okay, that was not the show that I was writing. So I would ask them to go and, come back with something else, something from home, something I would, not give them too much instruction. And they would come back as a completely transformed human being.
Right.
Their voice would change, their body language would change, they would come low to the ground, they would just be a different performer.
It's really amazing what language does.
Yeah,
yes.
And it's interesting that even when I interviewed you talked about your mother and how she used to go out and there was a performative way in which we behave when we're in company.
Exactly. Thinking about my, drinking tea. From that bone china.
Yes. Completely proper. And then when we come home, we're like,
let it all hang out.
But then, we're still, even now, not able to invite people into our homes because we're afraid of how they might see us.
Right.
Yeah. And so this show, Kigezindoto, was supposed to create the hero in all of us so that we would have a sense of pride, but also that we would show the Europeans that we're not just about doom and gloom and all the things that they're fed on the newspapers and in the media. The show was a huge success.
Yes.
We went for 3 weeks in Europe, came back. I spent 4 years fundraising, and then we did a tour of East Africa and did 33 more shows.
Wow.
And it was phenomenal to see audiences respond to a piece of theatre that really was written for us, not written for the Europeans.
Right.
But the funding allowed us to then take this to Tanzania and so many towns in Kenya, and to have young people and old people say, this is amazing.
Yes.
And then we used it also as a peace and reconciliation workshop. After the 2008 elections, we got some funding from UNDP, which is the United Nations Development Program. So we didn't the UN is useful.
Yes.
And
yes.
I may have alluded to a difficult situation, but that was maybe on a personality level.
Right.
Where one boss is dynamic and another is not. Because I really thank the guy who sent me to go and do the degree, because that degree gave me the kind of confidence that then meant that I was available to write work for a larger audience. because nothing is useless.
Exactly.
I came out of the UN saying, I've spent 10 years, I've wasted my life. But actually, everything that I did there was completely useful.
Absolutely.
Because then I was able to write a proposal to UNDP,
yes,
which then allowed us to take our show to Mount Elgon.
Right.
And to use it to bring two communities together who had been warring after the elections.
I want you first of all to just finish because the Mount Elgon story is so important.
Yeah.
But I want you to paint a picture of some of the things that you did that were very, very, very innovative with Kigezi Ndoto. I know that when I watched it, just the colors, you had these costumes of shades of oranges and yellows and earth colors and browns, and that just did wonders for our skin. So the skin, the actors. First of all, you had a large team, and you had a team from both Kenya and Tanzania.
Yeah.
So you brought your Tanzanians into the mix and their music and their musical. And so I really want you to share that, so that just take a few minutes and share that, so that people get what I saw.
Well, hopefully when you are broadcasting this, you'll be able to use some clips, because
we will.
One of the things that I love to do, and this is what I was saying about nothing being a waste.
And your hamster tendencies,
yes,
is that you've got the clips.
My hamster tendencies, but also the fact that I was a librarian at the UN, at UNICEF, means that I document everything. And so I have an archive of material of our tour. And hopefully you'll be able to show your audience what the piece looked like. But I wanted to create, there was very little on the internet. And I was looking for heroes, like I said. And I went on the internet and I said, we all came from Egypt. We all came from Kemet. This is my feeling. And so I designed together with the people who helped me put together the look of the show.
Right.
I wanted a sense of Egypt. And so the men are wearing a knitted version of a shield that you see if you Google Egyptian ancient dress. We had headdresses and staffs and sticks and rods and seats that were low, and everything that I was trying to create an ancient Africa that doesn't exist, but when we were giants, not when we were slaves, because often our history is told as if it started at slavery, or for African Americans as if it started at slavery. But actually before that, we were giants.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to create that idea, and I love the colors of the earth. I wear them myself often. And so working with Shiro Waithaka, I created an idea that would sit. I'm always conscious about how I want people to leave the room. So you're watching the show, but I want the show to stay with you.
Right.
Because unlike film, once you leave the room or once the show is over, it doesn't exist anymore. It's not like film.
Right.
So I'm always very conscious about trying to create something that sits in your memory and that cloaks you. And I'm really happy that you're telling me that the colors.
The colors.
But it's all. I'm not trying to be facetious, but really it's an instinct. It's not that I know what I'm doing.
Right.
Because first of all, like I said, I didn't speak Swahili.
And I
didn't know any of these heroes. I was learning about Queen Hatshepsut, who was the first female pharaoh. I was learning all of these, all of these people who then we evoke and who we talk about in the show. I'm learning about them as I'm teaching.
Right.
And another thing that we tried to that we not tried. Another thing that we did was, this was now, I think, the culmination of the way that I developed the way I do my theatre. We speak to the audience without what is called the fourth wall.
Right.
We're speaking directly to our audience. We want them to engage with us. Even if we are in a proscenium arch, which is the Western style theatre, we're talking, we're repeating ourselves. There's a call and response.
Yes.
And I think that also makes audiences own the work.
Right.
Because I've always said that the work actually doesn't belong to me.
Right.
Yeah, there's an element of wanting you to find in my work who we were.
Mumbi, Mount Elgon. Can you talk to us about Mount Elgon and the work that you did using theatre with those communities that were in such horrific conflict? Yeah.
We wrote a proposal to UNDP, and they had a department called a Peace and Reconciliation Program, and they gave us funding. First of all, when we did our first tour, we went around Kenya.
This is the tour of Kigezi Ndoto,
yes.
right? Yeah.
But we had a tour of Kigezi Ndoto that went on 3 legs. We had written out the proposal so that we had 3 legs. The first leg went to those towns where there had been serious conflict during the 2008 elections in Kenya. And I hadn't visited any of those areas. I had worked with people in Nairobi in the informal settlements around that time, but I wasn't aware that the tents were still up. The internally displaced people's villages were still in place. So when we went round to the
and the internally displaced people were displaced because of the election, a botched election. Right, in December 2007, where we almost had a civil war in Kenya, and the international community came and thank goodness stopped. Yeah, but there were internally displaced people, and 1,300 people died. I'm just saying that so that, for the record, for people who don't know, and giving that context. Why don't you continue?
So we're doing our tour in 2010 in April. And the tents are still up.
Wow.
And I had no idea.
Right.
And, you're driving along the highway from Nairobi to Western Kenya through Nakuru, which is in the Rift Valley, which is where the tensions were very, very strong.
Right.
And in the middle distance, you can see these white tents.
Yes.
And Kenya has, this is not who we were.
Yes.
We had fooled ourselves that we were not angry people, that we weren't violent people.
We're different.
And we were peaceful. And everybody around us was having problems, but we were a haven of peace.
Yeah, ocean of peace.
Yes, but turmoil. That's actually was not, this dispelled all of those myths. So I went back to UNDP and I said, you funded this portion of the tour. Would you allow us to go back and perform in the IDP camps?
Internally displaced camps. Yes.
And so they said yes. So we had added a 4th leg. And in the 4th leg, that's when we went to Mount Elgon as one of the places that we went to. And we went to Bomet. There were 2 groups of people, the Kisii and the Kipsigis. And the border was this area called Bomet. And we took Kigezi Ndoto and created a piece of theatre that they could see, because one of the things about Kigezi Ndoto is that I don't know whether we became more verbally ethnic oriented. So we were always about, where are you from? What's your surname? A lot more than we had ever been. So my cast actually are from everywhere in Kenya.
Right. So the post-election violence created divisions among us, and people would be interested in where you came from and would judge you based on your
ethnic
your ethnic group, and they would know that because of the name and also how you looked, and it could get very dangerous.
So when we came to these communities, we would introduce ourselves and we would say, I am so and so, and I'm so and so, and I'm so and so, and all 9 of us would speak our names. And subconsciously, what I wanted to say is, we're getting along.
Right.
And then we would create a piece of theatre. We had 10 people from Kipsigis group through the Ministry of, I'm not sure which ministry, but there were these peace and development committees.
Right.
And they brought together the people who we would then worked with. In Mount Elgon, similarly, there were people from the top of the mountain and the people from the bottom of the mountain who had been warring for many, many, many years.
And there's the same ethnic group, but but one comes from the top and one comes from the bottom.
They speak the same language.
Right.
And in both of those cases, what we did is one of the things that I do when I work with communities is we sit in a circle and we all tell a story based on a certain number of questions that I might have. And one of the questions that I was asking then was, have you ever come, it's one of actually Anna Devere Smith's questions, have you ever been in a situation where you almost died?
Wow.
And of course, everybody in these communities had a story about almost dying or seeing death. And then we would then create a piece of theatre that then celebrated who they were in a way that then the other community could see these are humans like us.
Okay, so the question, its objective was to humanize, to first of all to help everybody understand that they're basically in the same boat, and then to humanize the other in the eye, in my eye. So humanize you in my eyes, and this is so amazing, because one of the questions I'm sure people are listening to this are saying, what is it? How is theatre important in life and in when people are almost killing each other, and here we are seeing it.
So what I did is we created these pieces that were actually their story. So somebody would say, I took my cows out in the morning or in the evening, and I met my neighbor, and this is a neighbor who we have always been friends, and then we started to fight. And when we were casting the group, like I said, there were 10 people from one group and 10 people from another. We had, in the case where the languages were different, I mixed them so that, let's say I am asking you a question, because I don't speak these languages, but I had the pieces were in the languages that were spoken by the community people.
Right.
So I would speak in my language, and then when I ask you a question, you would repeat the question in your language, so the audience knows what we're talking about,
right?
Because both of us have spoken the question. So
in the relevant language,
different languages.
Right.
So I would say, and this is why call and response is so wonderful, because I would say, are you going to take the cows out of the corral or something? And then you would say in your language, the cows, you're telling me to take the cows out of the corral. So now the audience, because I've spoken my language, you've spoken yours, anybody who's in the audience who speaks either languages understands. What it also did was it had an added effect where when we would have lunch, because we worked for 9 days, created the piece and then took it round to the trading centers in the area for communities, the community members to see these performances, I would have people come up to me and say, you know, I've never sat next to somebody from the other tribe. We were always told that they were terrible people.
Wow.
And you have come, and in 9 days, I have a best friend
From
who has
the other
invited
tribe.
me to
Yeah.
their house, and I've met their parents. So
Wow.
apart from the play itself,
Uh-huh.
there was another thing that happened that I had no idea was going to happen.
And that is the magic. You know, when you started off talking about Kigenzindoto, you said you didn't speak Kiswahili at the time. You were learning all sorts of history as you were writing, as you were creating. And the thing about theater that I love is that magic happens. Magic happens that you've got no control
and
over.
you step
Thank
away
God.
from it, and
Yes.
this thing belongs to this group of people.
Right.
And I don't have to be there in order for it to keep going.
We are going to stop there. Mumbi Kaigwa. Thank you so
Thank
much
you
for
so much.
for what you're giving us, and we're going to continue the conversation because we haven't even talked about your international awards, have we? From Egypt, Tunisia, and South Africa. We haven't even talked about those. So obviously we have to continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.
This is the Africa Theatre Podcast. My name is Sitawa Namwalie, and we've just been talking to Mumbi Kaigwa, and we will continue. I know that you want us to continue.